President Biden is pushing for changes to the Supreme Court, which he promised when he dropped out of the race. In an opinion piece in the Washington Post today, Biden asked Congress for 18-year term limits for Supreme Court justices, a code of conduct and rules, and a constitutional amendment that would remove prosecution immunity privileges from presidents. Biden writing that, quote, "No one is above the law, not the President of the United States, not a justice on the Supreme Court of the United States." Here now to explain all this a bit further is North Central College political science professor Stephen Caliendo.
Good afternoon. Nice to see you. Thanks for joining us.
Good to be here.
Okay, so let's talk about the constitutional amendment on presidential immunity, a direct response, of course, to the recent ruling in favor of former President Trump and his legal troubles. So some progressives have long said, this is time to get behind Biden. I'm sorry, let me separate this. I want to get your response first to the presidential immunity.
Well, I mean, I think that, first of all, I'm going to say the timing is terrible. I really think I don't like this. I don't think this is the time. I think the next president should lead us through a national conversation about possible reforms to the courts. It's not the same idea of a court that was there 200 years ago. The issues before them are not the same. And I'm not just talking about technology. I mean, meaningful, broad issues. We spent a good part of the middle of the 20th century arguing whether the Bill of Rights should apply to the states. That's certainly been settled, even if some longstanding precedent has recently been overturned. And so I think there should be some conversation about it, but I do not think this is the time we should be doing it.
Let's talk about that code of conduct for Supreme Court justices. What would that even look like?
I mean, there's already a code of conduct, but the problem is it doesn't have any teeth. I think what Congress could do is pass a law. I mean, the real mechanism for enforcing behavior on the U.S. Supreme Court is impeachment. We haven't used it very often. It's been a long time since we've moved to impeach a U.S. Supreme Court justice. Other federal judges have been impeached. So that's there. I think what needs to happen, though, is that there could be some attachment of ethical violations to the impeachment process, and so that it's clear that when an accusation of an ethical lapse it comes into play, then we can move forward for impeachment processes. But I don't think there's anything that new needs to happen with respect to legislation. There just needs to be some enforcement mechanism.
So there's been a lot of talk about how the Supreme Court is untouchable despite some things that have gone on in the past and that there could be no ramifications. Can Biden do anything to take away the Supreme Court power at all?
No, Sylvia, he can't, and he shouldn't be able to. One of the reasons I say the timing is so bad is because it does come on the heels of a series of decisions that the Democrats don't like, and that's that happens sometimes. That doesn't mean that there shouldn't be reforms, but it also doesn't mean that you need to react immediately and try to change the court. Franklin Delano Roosevelt considered doing that in the 1940s. In the 1930s, rather, when his New Deal programs were being struck down, and the public was generally against that move because they saw it as political. So it doesn't mean we shouldn't have the conversation, but this is not the time to do it. The court has certainly, it's not normal. I think President Biden is right about what he wrote in the op-ed this morning. How the court has been operating has not been normal, but it has a lot to do with the Senate confirmation process. It has a lot to do with the way money is involved in politics now. And so these are things that have come up recently. We should have the conversation. I just don't think we should have it now.
Well, thanks for being part of our conversation this afternoon, Professor Caliendo. Always good to see you.
Good to see you both.